I'm here to introduce Rory McEntee. He is a PhD and President and Executive Director of the Charis Foundation for New Monasticism and Interspirituality. He's co-author of the New Monasticism and Interspiritual Manifesto for Contemplative Living and was the administrator for the Snowmass Interspiritual Dialogue Fellowship, a 30-year project convened by Father Thomas Keating, engaging contemplative leaders from multiple faiths in intimate dialogue. Rory has taught world religions, contemplative spirituality, and philosophy at various universities and did doctoral work in philosophy, theology, and mathematics. Rory was a close friend and mentee of both Father Thomas Keating and Brother Wayne Teasdale, with whom he worked to found the Interspiritual movement. If you haven't heard him already, it will be a delight for you to listen to Rory talk about his new monasticism and the Charis process.
Thank you, Deb. Well, welcome everyone, and welcome to everyone online who's on Zoom there. So this is on Charis Circles. And I will say a little bit at the beginning here to just get us oriented, but I think mostly what I am hoping for is we'll actually have a mini experience of a Charis circle. So we'll try and make it a little more experimental, and hopefully there'll be some time at the end for Q&A. No promises though. So what would I say? And I apologize for some of you who you may have heard some stuff, been traveling around to different things. But, one of the things I was talking about in the last session was the Snowmass dialogues that Father Thomas Keating did, and how a lot of the work of the foundation that I helped to do the work for and run the Charis Foundation has kind of grown out of the spirit of those dialogues. Combined with the deep spiritual practice of centering prayer. And of course, centering prayer is more than just a 20-minute spiritual practice. It's our whole lives, right? I'll never forget Brother Wayne Teasdale was one of my first teachers, and I was young, and I gave up some opportunities to go be a waiter and hang out in Chicago with this crazy monk who lived in a one-bedroom apartment. And so it was like, well, I better commit to meditation. What do I do? He said, meditate twice a day. And so I did, and I committed. I was very committed with lots of obstacles that came up, which I later realized are really gifts, I think, as we all do. There's certain things that we can never get into our bones and into our practice without those obstacles. And so if you ever find that 20 minutes twice a day, or a half hour, or really 45 minutes or more twice a day is difficult, rejoice and make it happen. Because once you do it, all of a sudden it'll switch, and then you don't have to do it anymore. You do the practice. It's in your bones, and you can't miss it. You can't. In fact, you might even come to a point where you're asked to let go of the practice itself because you're using it as a crutch. But that comes quite a bit later. And so, embrace the obstacles because they're building, they're anchoring something in our being and in our body and in our bones and our flesh that can't be done any other way. And so I'll never forget, I did this when I was committed, and Brother Wayne said, okay, so now you have your meditation in your life. It's time to get your life in your meditation. And what he meant was, it wasn't enough to just do the practice twice a day and say, okay, I'm doing it. Now I just plow forward. Then it was about getting every piece of your life is not necessarily different from your meditation. It's all part of it. It's all integrated, and you're always you're always in a state of discerning the Spirit and discerning the will of God in every decision and every little movement, whether you watch this TV show or that TV show or a Thomas video maybe, which Thomas video, but just everything. It just becomes, and then there's no separation between inner and outer. It's not a question of what do I do in the world? Do I do inner practice? Do I do this in the world? Because you're just discerning all the time. You're just in this movement. And so it just kind of flows through it all. So The Charis Circles then come out of this deep practice of centering prayer and meditation and getting it all into our lives, but with the spice of diversity. Particularly religious diversity in this context, but all kinds of diversity. And that was very present in the spirit of Thomas's Snowmass dialogues. And so we kind of grew out of that energy into these Charis circles. And like I said, they're pretty simple, but we have found them, and we're in the beginning stages of kind of doing it. We have 3 cohorts that we're training, that we've trained 2 have graduated, I guess, and the 3rd one to facilitate these. And they're meant to create interspiritual communities of practice. So today often a question arises when we get together, if we're not just in our own religious community or a traditional religious community, how can we practice together? How can we form a community with deep spiritual roots? But maybe we're not, and we have found particularly among younger generations, I'm sure that at least some of you have noticed that a decent amount of people in younger generations are rejecting traditional religious paths. In this country, particularly, Christianity is on the cutting block, which is perhaps both an opportunity to reassess and also a shame that there's a deep tradition that is also our culture. And most people don't even know it. It's in it's in our bones if we're in the West. Language of the Spirit is natural. And even the younger people that totally reject Christianity, they respond to language of the Spirit. It's really interesting. And so in this milieu where you have people who are choosing different paths, people who don't want to be in any religious tradition, people who want to be in more than one and doing practices, how do we form communities of practice? How do we form something like our centering prayer group? And so that's what Charis Circles are meant to be, is an opportunity to do that. It's probably worth mentioning that we held the first 2 opening retreats for the cohort facilitation for Charis Circles at St. Benedict's. In fact, we were the very last retreat ever held there, and it closed the day after. They didn't let anyone else come. So it was it's a sad moment, but also kind of profound. And we invited Pat Johnson up for both of those too. And she kind of gave closing talks to both of our Charis Circle group facilitators as they began what's now a 6-month facilitation process, kind of training. So that's a little bit sad, but wanted to mention. And with that, I think I just want to get into the more experiential part. And we'll try to actually do a mini Charis Circle. So what I'm going to have you do now is I want you to take the chairs and form groups of like 4 or 5. So 4 or 5, and just in a circle. Form, doesn't really matter who you're with, but see if we can create however many little mini circles we need of like 4 or 5 people, and I'll just kind of lead us through a practice. The way a Charis Circle goes, it's essentially, centering prayer practice, and then as we come out of the practice, it's a kind of communal Lectio Divina practice that I'll read us through. And it's actually the ancient Christian monastic practice of collatio that I learned from the monks at New Camaldoli Hermitage, where I lived with them for a time, 6-7 months, and lived the rhythm with them. And it was one of the things I picked up there. And so to just kind of lead us into our centering prayer practice, I'm going to give us a little quick exercise for it first. So as we know, we kind of have a symbol that we use to return to as our consent to this process of transformation. And so I want you to just think about what it is that you're consenting to. What is it? And try to get some clarity on it, just in your own mind for maybe 30 seconds. How would you describe it? How do you know it's real? Why are you here? Why do you do it? And so just take 20 seconds or so and kind of think it through a little. Okay, so and now I want you to think just a little bit about what came up for you in terms of what you're consenting to. And in some guess, there's some words there, there's something very real and palpable. It's also very difficult to put into words, right? There's almost an infinite nuance to it. In some ways, it's like the night sky, these bright lights and these stars. But in between them, they're just little flashpoints of what we're consenting to. But really, it's almost like vast spaciousness, right? There's little lights here and there, or it's like an atom. And you have your electrons and your protons and your neutrons, but they're so tiny, and the space between them is so big that it's kind of like that. We have little flashpoints of light within this great spaciousness. And so now I want you to imagine an almost kind of infinite plane, like a big piece of paper that just goes on and on and on. And on that piece of paper is some of what came up for you, is what you're consenting to. You know, what was personal, what really resonates with you. And those are like little flashpoints on this infinite plane with all of its spaciousness that can never capture what we're actually trying to connect with. And so do we kind of have that image in our mind? And now I want you to imagine folding it all up, all of it up, into a tiny little origami figure. Somehow it can all fold up into this tiny origami figure that's in front of us, and that's our symbol. Whether it's a word or a symbol or your breath, all of that is contained in the symbol. And in the practice, that's what we're returning to over and over again. It's palpable and it's light. It's not a burden. It's not heavy. It's light as a feather. Tiny little origami figure. And so with that, somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes of centering prayer practice, and then I'll lead us through the communal reading practice. Just kind of slowly and gently come out of our meditation. And then I'm just going to kind of read us through a communal reading practice. And so, you know, we have a number of groups in here. So as we do it, I just concentrate on your group. Zone in on it. Listen to your group. Kind of create a little bubble. So you guys are just in this together, even though you'll hear other little popcorns from the groups around you. So what I'm going to do is have a short reading here that I'm going to read. And I'm going to read it a few times, and I'll kind of give instructions each time. So the first time I read this, just see if a single word kind of sticks out to you. And then what we're going to have you do in your groups is each person just name that word. You say it out loud. Maybe the first person that's kind of names a word, you can just go around to your right and let everybody in the group kind of name their word. And when we do these readings, it's like Lectio Divina. We're not reading for information. We may or may not pick up, especially when it's oral, everything that's being said, but that's not the point of it. Where is the spirit bubbling up? Where is it hitting you? So, your teachers are all around you. All that you perceive, all that you experience, all that is given to you or taken from you, all that you love or hate, need or fear, will teach you. if you will learn. God is your first and your last teacher. And so just call out a word in your group that came up for you, and out loud so that others can hear. Okay. So I'm going to read it again. I picked a quite short reading for this to try and get us through it in our hour-long period. And this time, I want you to see if a phrase sticks out to you. So just a phrase. Your teachers are all around you. All that you perceive, all that you experience, all that is given to you or taken from you, all that you love or hate, need or fear, will teach you if you will learn. God is your first and your last teacher. So go ahead and feel free to call out a phrase, and then you can just kind of go around the circle so that everyone can pitch in. And as we do this, I know we're kind of staying in a meditative state, but I also, as we name our word or say our phrase, we're present to each other. So we're not just there with eyes closed, but we're present with each other. We're listening deeply. We're not thinking about what we're going to say, but really allowing what the other person says to get poured into our circle and to hold it. And so I'm going to read it one more time. And after this reading, what we're going to do is have, hopefully in each circle, one brave person can go first. And I'll give you about a minute and a half to just share some reflection or what's coming up for you. So not a word or a phrase, but what just seems to be bubbling up in this moment. And again, without worrying about what will come up to you when your turn is, just listening to each person, trusting that you'll have something to share when it's there. Your teachers are all around you. All that you perceive, all that you experience, all that is given to you or taken from you, all that you love or hate, need or fear will teach you if you will learn. God is your first and your last teacher. And so go ahead and just pay attention to the bell. I will ring the bell at about a minute and a half intervals, and then we'll just move on to the next person in the group. Okay, everyone, let's grow quiet again, and then to close out our practice, and this will just be the closing of it, I'm going to read one more time our reading. And so I don't forget to mention, our reading today is from Octavia Butler, a book called The Parable of the Sower, and she's a quite popular science fiction writer, actually, African-American science fiction writer, and a woman, and there aren't a whole lot of those in science fiction. So here's our reading. And maybe, part of the closing of the circle is maybe you hear the reading a little bit different. Maybe something someone said struck you. Maybe it brings something together for you that wasn't wholly there before. Your teachers are all around you. All that you perceive. All that you experience. All that is given to you or taken from you. All that you love or hate, need or fear will teach you if you will learn. God is your first and your last teacher. Okay, so we can bring our chairs back, I guess. I hate to break the circles, but if you ever do your own Charis circle, you won't have to. And so that's a Charis circle. It's simple, but there's a subtlety to it, and we have found in teaching it that there's a power to it. It continues to build over time as you do it. So there's the sharing of silence together, and then the reading practice is, in our experience, it's doing a lot that's not necessarily always noticed at first. I mean, I know that we often have groups and we share, but there's a kind of way that it allows everyone to be part of it in an equal way. And that it's weaving community. It's weaving a solidarity under the surface of what we share with each other, of what's held in the silence, that really does build community, and allows us to witness each other's journeys, and allows us to learn from each other's journeys and each other's experience, and in no way demands that we all have the same path, the same framework for understanding our journey, or even the same spiritual practices. And so it's very simple, but I think there's actually a depth and a power that we're finding in the practice that seems to work and seems to kind of add something to communities of practice that hasn't always been there. Yes, because traditionally in our communities of practice, we're all facing the same way, and that's not necessitated in the Charis circles. And so I guess I just want to kind of any questions and answers. We don't have much time and only have a few minutes, but I would love to open it up for that.
I have heard, don't know if it's correct or not, that Caris, it's an acronym actually of something.
Charis is actually the Greek word for grace, and the core word of for charism, and it's spelled. It looks like Charis. It's Charis, but it's pronounced Charis.
In the prayer time, like with an interspiritual group, each person would practice their meditation in from their own tradition. Is that the idea?
We are creating cohorts where we're leading them through. It was initially a year, now it's 6-month training to facilitate a Charis circle. Couple hours twice a month, and it mostly involves doing a Charis circle and practicing it and practice leading it. And what we do is if you come to a Charis circle and you have an established practice, has to be a silent meditation, then you're free to do that in the circle. That's fine. We're not trying to impose someone else's practice. Now, we want everyone meditating, so we don't want you sitting there just thinking. And what we do is train the facilitators to offer basic instructions in Charis meditation. So it's the interspiritual version of centering prayer is at the core of it, and we ask the facilitators to be doing that practice because there's, you can see in the reading practice after, there is a way that flows with centering prayer and kind of the movement of the spirit. So you're holding that space, but we're not necessitating everyone do that practice. Totally fine to do your own practice, but if you come to a circle and you don't have a practice, we will teach you essentially centering prayer, but in an interspiritual version of it that allows people to do it. And so it's meant to be kind of like AA, very broad-based. Someone can start a community, a Charis Circle, almost anywhere. And you can start it in your community. You could start one on Zoom, and it's meant to be able to spread very broad. You know, it's a bit different than training someone to be a meditation teacher. We're not doing that. But that'll be a different kind of training. But, you know, basic instructions and that you're doing the practice. And so it's really meant to be able to spread communities of practice for people that want them.
Question about, we were in a small circle, and I just wanted a bit of comment about the size. I actually have more questions than I can ask now, but I'd like something on that. And then the other question was, for some people, their meditative practice, for instance, incorporates movement. And is there a place for those individuals in a Charis circle? And for some people, they speak out loud, for instance, or whatever. So tell me if there's space for that.
Again, good questions. And right now I would say, no, we need people doing silent meditation. You know, again, it comes out of the spirit and energy also of the Snowmass dialogues, where we all sat together in silence in a circle and found that allowed, you know, more is happening than just everyone practicing. Our whole being and our energies are meeting each other and mingling and mixing. And so we need to respect that kind of silent practice for everyone. So obviously if someone was, and it's not to take anything away from someone who has movement meditation or prays out loud, it's wonderful. But this is one way to create a community of practice amongst a lot of diversity. And then in terms of numbers, another good question. So we say up to like 12, basically. We think this works well. So you can start a Charis circle. I don't even care how small it is. Doesn't matter. Once you start to get over 12, it gets a little more difficult, takes a little bit more time. Maybe you split the group. And then you just kind of keep growing like that and get to 12 and you can split it again and keep moving. You know, because with 12 people, it's about an hour and a half. About an hour and a half to go through the whole thing. And we would recommend, instead of a minute and a half, maybe it's more like 2.5 minutes of sharing. You do something between 2 and 3 minutes. The bells are super important. And, you know, that's a way where we just keep everyone on the same level and same ground. And it's not to cut anyone off or anything. It's just to recognize diversity. Some person will talk for 30 seconds and think it was 10 minutes. Another person will talk for 45 minutes and think it was 5 minutes, right? And it's, our brains just don't all function the same way, so.
Your reading was drawn from a rather unusual place, Octavia Butler. Where else do you tend to draw readings from? And what do you, are there additional ground rules with regard to not giving advice and all that, not over talking and all that?
Yeah, so the answer would be yes. There's probably definitely some additional ground rules, which is why we kind of do a 6-month training for facilitating. Not a ton, though. And if anyone's interested, you can get in contact with us, particularly on our website. In terms of readings, a lot of sources. You know, it's something that allows for it and can be unique to groups that form, too. And can be unique to the facilitators, or you can begin to bring people maybe from the group may have readings. There's some skill in it. It's not anything, any reading or anything goes, so there's some discernment, but it can be from many different sources. It can be a poem, it can be from different religious traditions. It's, again, it's not the, it's the core of what it's saying and how it moves us. And sometimes people have readings that don't seem to make any sense or that are longer, but you'll get some of the best discussions and the best insights out of them as well. But they should be spiritual readings, right? There's a spiritual depth component to the reading. I hope you enjoyed it. And a big thank you to all the people putting on the conference. It's been so great. So thank you. Take care.